Hi, I am Clara. And on my wedding day, my sister Evelyn didn't just steal the spotlight. She tore my heart apart with a venomous toast, branding me a charity case in heels as our mother smirked. The crowd gasped, some snickered, and I felt the sting of betrayal sharper than any knife. I stood, frozen in a borrowed dress, until Nathan, the man they expected to stay mute, stormed in, silencing the mocking room. What followed wasn't just silence. It wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. The sun was bright but not blinding as I stepped onto the brick sidewalk outside Evelyn's favorite bridal boutique in Savannah. The storefront glistened with soft gold letters and champagne-tinted window decals that read, "Bridal Elegance" by Margot. It was the kind of place that offered you herbal tea while you waited and used words like timeless instead of expensive. I walked in with a soft smile, fingers tracing the hem of my blazer. Today was supposed to be my final fitting. The woman behind the desk looked up with a courteous smile. "Hi there, name?" "Clara Whitfield. I have a 4:30. Her fingers danced over the keyboard. Pause. Her brow creased. Tap, tap, tap. "I'm sorry, there's nothing under Clara Whitfield." I tilted my head, keeping my tone calm. "Could you check again?" "It should have been scheduled weeks ago. My sister, Evelyn, arranged it." As if summoned, Evelyn swept in through the glass doors like a movie star returning to her set. Her curls were perfect, her beige coat flowing like it had its own budget. "Oh, don't tell me she forgot to input the name," she chirped, voice syrupy. I turned, trying to catch her eye, trying to understand if this was a mistake or another one of her oversights. "Clara, darling, relax," she cooed, loud enough for the room to hear. "You're always so dramatic about these little things." Evelyn put a manicured hand on my arm. "It's fine. I brought the gown I wore to last month's charity gala. You can use that one." I blinked. "That's not my wedding dress." She leaned in, her smile still camera-ready. "It's practically unworn and it flatters your figure. We don't have time for delays." I glanced at the other women in the boutique. One sipping something herbal, another scrolling on her phone. I felt their eyes land on me like feathers with weight. I swallowed. "Fine," I said. Quiet. Too quiet. We moved to a private fitting room. Evelyn opened the garment bag with a flare. The dress shimmered, but not in the way I'd envisioned. It was too sheer, too low in the back, too her. The attendant helped me into it. As the zipper rose, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt like I was staring at a version of me that didn't speak up. "You look stunning," Evelyn said behind me, already on her phone. I smiled because what else could I do? That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of lukewarm wine, dress still hanging from the bedroom door. My phone buzzed. Another message from Evelyn, this time about the seating chart. "You don't need to worry about it," she'd written. "I've got everything under control." I thought back to when we were kids. Aline always chose first. Halloween costumes, cereal boxes, even the side of the bed closest to the nightlight. I learned early to smile through it, to let her lead. My mother always said, "It's easier that way." Now, years later, here we were, Aline in control of my entire wedding. I told myself she meant well, that this was just how she showed love. 3 days later, the invitations arrived. I was sitting on the porch with a sweater draped over my shoulders when the delivery guy handed me the thick ivory envelope. My breath caught. Gold trim embossed text-heavy cardstock, the kind you keep in a memory box. I opened it carefully, then I stared. The name read, Grace Lily Whitfield. At first I thought it was a misprint. Then I remembered my mother used to call me her little charity case when I couldn't afford things growing up. She'd say it with a laugh like it was sweet. I drove to my parents' house, invitation in hand. My mother, Beatrice, barely looked up from her crossword. "Isn't it lovely?" she said. "Grace suits you. It has softness." My voice cracked. "It's not my name." She shrugged. "It's just an invitation. No one will notice." I turned to Evelyn, who stood by the mantel sipping coffee like it was a press interview. She blinked, all innocence. "That's awful. I'll have the printer fix it right away." "Honestly, Clara, you're making a fuss over nothing," she added, her tone cutting. They didn't. And I didn't press. I told myself it didn't matter, that the dress, the seating, the name, they were just details, that I should focus on the marriage, not the wedding. But even lies told to ourselves start to ache if we hold them too long. Later that week, after a dinner alone and a long hot shower, I pulled down an old box from the closet. It was dusty, smelling faintly of cedar and lavender, my late grandmother's things. I hadn't opened it since her passing. Inside was a silk handkerchief, white, delicate, and hand-embroidered. One name. Mine. Clara. My fingers trembled as I held it. A part of me that had felt faded suddenly reappeared in full color. I pressed it to my chest and whispered, "At least you never forgot who I am." I held that handkerchief like a lifeline. It was a little after 7 when I stepped out of the car and into the warm evening air outside the Magnolia House. The rehearsal dinner had already begun. Through the windows I could see silhouettes swaying with laughter, a golden glow dancing off the glass. I adjusted the borrowed gown, still too tight around the ribs, and walked carefully across the gravel path in borrowed heels that didn't quite fit. Inside, the host gave me a quick glance before waving me toward the main room. A waiter brushed past with a tray of chilled champagne flutes. I smiled politely, scanning for my name card. There it was, tucked at the far end of the long mahogany table. Grace Double. I stood there for a second, frozen. Not just at the name, but at the location right next to the restroom door. A soft clatter echoed behind me as someone flushed. A child's voice screamed, then giggled, and just like that, the ambient music of my wedding rehearsal became bathroom sounds. I took my seat in silence, careful not to let my dress touch the slightly damp floor tiles near the threshold. Across the table, Eveline waved brightly. She was seated dead center, her spot flanked by our parents and Nathan's folks, like a queen surrounded by her loyal court. No one said anything about where I was placed. No one ever said anything. Soon the room quieted and Evelyn stood to give her toast. She tapped her glass delicately, smiling wide. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means the world to see so many generations of love in one room." Applause rippled softly around the table. She continued, lifting her glass higher. "To family traditions and strong women who make things happen. To Mom and Dad, who taught us the value of hard work and grace. To Aunt Lillian and Uncle Harold. To Nathan's wonderful parents, and of course to my little sister. Wouldn't be a full table without her." A few guests chuckled politely. Someone clinked their fork against a glass. I tried to lift my own, but my fingers weren't steady. I placed it back down before anyone noticed. The corners of my mouth lifted just barely. "Cheers," I said to no one. Later, as dessert was being served, something with pears and goat cheese I barely touched. I stood and quietly made my way around the table toward my mother. She was talking with Evelyn's future in-laws. But I leaned in gently and whispered, "Can I ask you something?" She turned, eyes still flicking toward the conversation behind her. "Of course, sweetheart. Did you notice where they sat me?" She blinked, then gave a soft laugh. "Someone had to sit there. Clara, don't read into it. You always take things too personally," she sighed, dismissing me with a wave. My mouth went dry. "I'm not reading into it. She placed a hand over mine with a pat. "Not everything is an attack. Be gracious. It's your big day." I nodded, lips pressed thin. I didn't trust my voice to come out calmly. As I turned to go back to my seat, or maybe just to walk outside and breathe, Nathan's best man, Lucas, stepped beside me. "I saw where they put you," he said quietly. I looked at him, uncertain if I wanted sympathy or just a shared moment of clarity. He scratched the back of his neck. "I would have switched with you, honestly, but I figured they had a system." I gave a half laugh. "Yeah, a system." Lucas shrugged awkwardly. "They had your name wrong, too. That your middle name?" "Not even close." He opened his mouth to say more, then thought better of it. I didn't go back to the table. Instead, I slipped down the hallway, past a coat rack, and into a quieter part of the inn. A tall old window was cracked slightly open, letting in a breeze that smelled of honeysuckle and something earthy. I rested my hand on the sill. I closed my eyes, letting the night air cool the heat rising in my face. Tomorrow will be different. But I didn't know that tomorrow. They had something far worse planned. The next morning arrived like nothing had ever been broken. Sunlight spilled across the rose bushes outside my window at the inn. I stood quietly in the garden, my heels sinking slightly into the soft grass as I traced the paved walkway toward the ceremony site. My fingers grazed the tops of the white hydrangeas that lined the aisle. Everything was perfectly arranged. Evelyn had made sure of it. Guests began to trickle into the space, their murmurs light and cheerful. A few stopped me along the path. "You look radiant," one woman said. Another added, "So elegant, just like your sister." I smiled, offering a polite nod, the kind people expect from a bride. Inside my hand, folded tightly, were the vows I had written just before dawn. I'd sat by the window in my room with a single lamp on, choosing every word carefully. They were mine, a quiet promise, a tiny rebellion. Now, tucked deep into my palm, the paper felt heavier than it should have. By the time the chairs were filled and the soft-string music began to play, I was seated under the archway near the officiant, heart steady but distant. Nathan stood across from me, calm and unreadable. Then came the signal. The officiant turned to me gently and gestured toward my hand. "Clara, if you'd like to begin." I stood. I exhaled. I unfolded the paper, but Evelyn's heels clicked across the wood platform before I could speak. "Sorry," she chirped, raising her glass. "Before we dive in, I just wanted to say a quick word on behalf of the family." The officiant paused, uncertain. Nathan didn't flinch. I froze, paper still trembling in my fingers. Evelyn took her place center stage, beaming. You know, growing up with Clara was always interesting. She was the quiet one, always scribbling in notebooks, keeping to herself. And now, well, would you look at her? Hair done, heels on, a miracle makeover. Polite laughter stirred across the rows. She used to wear these beat-up sneakers to dinner. Now she's in pearls. Amazing what love can do. Let's be honest. Clara needed all the help she could get, she added, winking at the crowd. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. My fingers crumpled the edge of the paper. Evelyn smiled sweetly at the guests, raised her glass again, and sat down. The officiant blinked, then nodded quickly, and continued on, right into the vows Nathan was expected to say. My moment was simply skipped. No one noticed except me. Later, after photos and cocktails and far too many congratulations I couldn't bring myself to accept, I was led into a side room behind the ballroom. Beatrice stood there with a clipboard. A man in a blue suit hovered behind her, holding a thin folder. "Honey," she said gently, "before we head into the reception, there's just one thing we need you to sign. Standard stuff, nothing stressful." She handed me the folder. It was a prenuptial agreement. My eyes scanned the first few lines. Everything was in Nathan's favor. Asset protection, inheritance limitations, even clauses about joint property. His signature was already there in smooth black ink. I looked around. "Where's Nathan?" "He's busy, sweetheart. Evelyn helped arrange this. It's just for protection. Totally normal." Beatrice gave a sympathetic tilt of her head. "Let's not make things awkward. Just sign for peace of mind. You trust him, right?" "Clara, don't ruin this for everyone," she whispered, her eyes narrowing. I stared at the pen in my hand. My thumb brushed the ring on my finger. There were so many faces just outside those doors waiting, so I signed, but I felt something shift inside, like a floorboard giving way. I walked through the rest of the reception in a daze. I danced. I smiled for photos. I thanked people I didn't remember inviting, but when the music faded and the lights dimmed, I returned alone to my room. I took off the borrowed gown, peeled the pins from my hair, and washed off the makeup. Then I pulled out the crumpled sheet from earlier that day. I sat cross-legged on the bed and unfolded it, smoothing the creases, and I read it to myself. I promise to be kind, even when the world is not. I promise to speak when others want silence, and to listen when it's hard. I promise to protect the parts of myself I used to hide, just to make others comfortable. And I promise never to disappear again, just to make someone else shine brighter. I held the page for a moment longer, then walked over to the nightstand. In the drawer, I found a small glass dish. I set the vows inside, struck a match, and lit the corner. It curled slowly, the ink bleeding into smoke. The room stayed quiet as I watched the fire eat my words. The fire in the glass dish had long faded by the time I stepped into the reception hall. The laughter inside, however, hadn't. It met me at the doors like a wave. Glasses clinking, heels clicking, the hum of string instruments buried beneath voices that had too much champagne and too little sincerity. I walked slowly toward the head table, every movement calculated. My borrowed gown hugged my frame the way borrowed things do, presentable but not mine. Nathan was already seated, straight-backed, his expression unreadable as ever. He offered a small smile, the kind you give when you know people are watching. I returned one that matched his. As I sat, Evelyn was already standing, microphone in hand. The spotlight found her before the music had even settled. "A little sisterly tribute," she said, flashing her white teeth. "Don't worry, I'll keep it short, unlike that stack of vows Clara wrote and never read." The crowd chuckled. My fingers curled into fists beneath the tablecloth. She began with what sounded like affection. Childhood anecdotes, school bus stories, the time I cried during The Lion King. Some guests laughed softly, others looked politely interested, eyes scanning the room for champagne refills. And then her voice turned sharper. "I mean, look at her now," she said, facing me with the stage-lit confidence of someone who believed the world adored her. "From clearance racks to Carolina couture, our little charity case in heels. Who would have thought?" "She's lucky we're here to make her look good," she sneered, drawing sharp laughs. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Some did, others didn't. A woman across the table shifted in her chair, her fork clinking awkwardly against her plate. A man near the bar chuckled, then cleared his throat. Nathan turned slightly toward me, but I didn't meet his eyes. Evelyn beamed as if she had just blessed me with the gift of attention, then handed the mic off to the MC and returned to her seat like nothing had happened. The applause was sparse, hollow. I sat still, smiling softly. My hands stayed locked beneath the table, the skin of my palms growing hot from pressure. Then came the next act. "Let's take a walk down memory lane, shall we?" Evelyn's voice rang out again, this time from somewhere behind me. A special surprise. The lights dimmed. A screen dropped down over the dance floor, and the footage began. There I was at 15, braces and bangs, tripping over my own feet in the middle of a high school gymnasium. The crowd in the video laughed. So did a few guests in the room. Next, me stammering through a freshman orientation speech in college, voice shaking, cheeks blotchy red. Then, a grainy home video from a family birthday. Evelyn biting into the last piece of cake while I sobbed in the background. Not a single clip of my nonprofit events. Not the interviews, not the news segment where I stood with volunteers in North Carolina after a hurricane. Just the awkward girl, they remembered, cut and packaged for everyone's amusement. The lights came back up. I clapped twice. So did others. Inside, I felt scraped clean, but I smiled anyway. Excusing myself, I moved through the maze of round tables toward the hallway near the restrooms. The overhead light flickered. I stepped into the women's room and faced the mirror. My lipstick was still perfect, my posture straight, but the woman looking back at me was tired of being polite. The door creaked open behind me. One of the bridesmaids stepped in, fiddling with a bobby pin. "I don't think she meant to be cruel," she said softly. "Cruelty doesn't always scream," I said. "Sometimes it clinks glasses." She didn't respond. I left the room, walked back into the head table. Nathan leaned toward me, his voice low. "You okay, Peachy?" I replied, reaching for my glass. He waited, then more carefully. "Do you want to leave?" I looked out over the room. My mother was laughing with a senator's wife at a corner table, wineglass in hand. Evelyn was reclying lipstick in her phone's reflection, already preparing for the next mic moment. I smiled faintly, then turned to him. "No," I said. "Let them think I'm still small. They'll see soon enough. I barely slept." There was a strange calm in my chest that morning. Not peace exactly, more like a heavy stillness. I moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who already knew the fight was coming and had no interest in rushing toward it. The knock came just as I was pinning my hair up. "Delivery for you, ma'am," the young man said, holding out a white envelope with a silver seal. I took it with a nod, closed the door gently, and turned it over in my hand. The seal cracked with a quiet snap as I slid the contents out. 4 sheets of thick cream-colored paper grant applications. My name, Clara Whitfield, typed neatly in the section labeled Program Coordinator. But the contact email, evelynwhitfieldgroup.com, I felt a slow warmth crawl up the back of my neck. It wasn't heat. It was something colder. There was a 5th page, a printed article from a local online magazine, PR Powerhouse Whitfield, championing education reform in rural communities. Her face was centered beneath the headline, a photo I recognized. It had been taken at the closing ceremony of a youth education summit I organized 2 years ago. She hadn't even been on the guest list that day. I'd invited our mother. Evelyn came instead. And now, that moment, my work, my voice, my name was dressed up in her signature fonts and sold back to the world with her smirk front and center. I sat down slowly, envelope limp in my lap. The silence in the suite pressed in from all corners. Not even birdsong outside, just stillness. I picked up my phone. No missed calls, no messages. Not from Nathan, not from my mother. A quiet click brought the screen to life. I opened my files. Search for the nonprofit name, Knowledge for All. Clicked through to their IRS 990 form. There it was, plain as the daylight spilling through the curtains. Program Director Evelyn Whitfield. I stared at it, blinked once, no tears. I scrolled further, reading every number, every fabricated line about initiative planning and fundraising strategy. It was a mosaic of my labor, but her name, my late nights, her photo ops, my outreach teams, her tax deductions. My jaw tightened. I wasn't just mocked, I was monetized. Hours passed. I didn't notice. I didn't move from the chair until a sharp chime from my phone broke the stillness. A voice memo from Evelyn. I opened it. Her voice was unmistakable, bright, sharp, and too casual for what came next. You should have seen her face when I called her charity case. Pathetic. But she took it, always does. Anyway, crop that forehead glare in the reel. It's giving victim. There was a brief pause, a clink of glass in the background. Then the recording ended. "She'll never fight back," she laughed in the memo, the words searing into my soul. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long beat. Then, with no drama, no hesitation, I forwarded it to Nathan. No message attached, no explanation, just the truth. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Nathan, incoming call. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was sharp. "Why didn't you tell me she was doing this to you?" I exhaled slowly. Instead, I answered simply, "Because I thought staying quiet would protect us." There was a pause. "But now I see," I continued. "Silence only protects them." Nathan didn't speak right away. I could hear him processing, breathing into whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I stopped making room for people who'd rather see me erased. The air that morning felt oddly still, the kind of quiet that didn't comfort, but warned. I was halfway through tying my robe when there was a soft knock at the suite door. I opened it to see Harper, the wedding videographer's assistant, standing awkwardly with a flash drive in her hand. "Evelyn wanted you to see the first cut of the highlight reel," she said, her tone clipped. I nodded without saying a word and took the USB from her fingers. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Once inside, I slipped it into the side of my laptop, fingers steady despite the sudden weight in my chest. The file booted up fast, high resolution, crystal clear. At first, soft music and drone shots of the venue. Then the guests arriving, Evelyn greeting them one by one, flashing that curated grin of hers. Then Evelyn again toasting in front of the twinkling string lights. Clip after clip of her speeches, her jokes, laughter echoing, guests nodding. But nowhere was there even a second of me standing at the altar. No vows, no close-up as I walked down the aisle. Not even my toast. The one I had rewritten 4 times. The one I rehearsed at 3 in the morning while fighting back the sting of the rehearsal dinner. They'd sliced me clean out of my own wedding. I paused the video. The image froze on Evelyn holding a champagne flute, caught mid-laugh. She stepped back in, hesitant. Yes? Was this the only edit you made? She shifted from one foot to the other. Evelyn said you didn't want anything too emotional in the final version. She thought maybe you'd be uncomfortable watching yourself. I nodded once. Calm, dead calm. I reached into my tote and pulled out a second USB drive, one I'd prepped weeks ago. Quietly, its label was handwritten in black ink. If I'm erased, let this play. I held it out. Listen to me carefully. If any version of that highlight reel goes live without my full footage, you send this instead. No questions, no delays, do you understand? Harper swallowed hard. Yes, I understand. She took it with both hands like it weighed something sacred, and in a way it did. Later that afternoon, after Harper left, I closed the blinds and sat alone on the couch with a cup of tea growing cold in my hand. I replayed what was on that second drive in my mind. The opening sequence showed email chains. Evelyn rewriting project attributions and removing my name from funding reports. It cut to IRS filings where my sister had claimed tax credits for work she never touched. Then voicemail snippets, her voice mocking. You should have seen her when I called her charity case. Pathetic. Then the images shifted. Photos from classrooms. Real ones, not staged. Kids I'd mentored. Teachers I'd trained. Flyers I'd printed with my last few dollars one winter when a grant fell through. Then my vows played over it all in my voice. Quiet, but resolute. And I promise never again to make myself smaller just to make others comfortable. The last sound was that raw voice memo from Evelyn again, unedited, with every bit of her disdain laid bare. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. There was no performance left in me, just clarity. That evening, around dusk, there was another knock, this time quieter, more familiar. I opened the door, and there stood Nathan, in full uniform. His expression unreadable, but something in his eyes told me he'd listened to the memo. Without saying a word, he stepped inside and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled something wrapped in white tissue. I recognized it instantly. The embroidered handkerchief from my grandmother, the one with my real name stitched in blue thread. He placed it gently in my palm. I looked up at him. I didn't need to explain. He didn't ask for one. I offered a faint smile. They thought I wouldn't notice, I whispered. They thought I wouldn't fight. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't need to, because he knew. I had just declared war. Not with shouting, but with truth, with receipts, and with a name they couldn't erase. The ballroom doors had already closed when I arrived. I didn't rush. I didn't fix my hair in the mirror by the entryway or tug at the silk seams of my dress. I just walked in, quiet, steady. The room was bathed in soft gold lighting, the kind meant to make even insincerity look romantic. Velvet chairs arranged in perfect symmetry, white-gloved servers circulating flutes of champagne and tiny bites on silver trays. The stage glowed at the far end of the room, where a long table sat elevated, lined with those who carried the Whitfield legacy, as Evelyn liked to say. I scanned the room. There, at the end of the front table, was a small white place card. One word stamped in a serif font, reserved. No name, no seat for me, and yet it had been mine. I stood there a moment too long enough to draw the notice of a few heads who turned and quickly turned back. Whispers hovered. The microphone crackled. Evelyn's voice, glassy, rehearsed, saturated with self-importance, drifted across the room. And of course, we're here to celebrate not just love, but legacy, she said, gesturing with practiced elegance. My family taught me that giving back isn't about duty, it's about identity. The crowd murmured approval. In front of her, our mother, Beatrice, beamed, posing beside a foundation board member, arm locked with the wife of a local congressman. A photographer snapped several pictures. "Family only, please," he called cheerfully. No one turned. No one gestured for me to step forward. I felt the weight of 1,000 tiny cuts, paper thin but deep. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I simply turned and made my way to the back of the room, stepping around white chairs and careful floral arrangements until I found a sliver of wall near the catering station. There, standing beside a young man in a server's vest balancing a tray of shrimp skewers, I folded my hands and watched. Evelyn was still mid-speech, basking in her moment. My mother had clasped her hands over her chest like she was watching a Broadway show. Guests laughed softly at the appropriate cues. And then the air shifted. The double doors opened again. Nathan stood in the doorway, full uniform, medals shining under the chandeliers, spine straight, expression calm. Too calm. He walked slowly, intentionally. Every step echoed louder than the music playing behind Evelyn's final words. By the time he reached the center aisle, people had turned fully in their chairs to look. Even Evelyn stuttered mid-sentence. Beatrice's hand fell from the congressman's wife's arm. Nathan didn't stop at the front table. He turned toward me. I was still by the wall, still beside the server, whose mouth had fallen slightly open. Nathan stopped right in front of me. He didn't speak. He didn't bow or make a show of it. He just extended his hand, open, steady. I looked at him, not in disbelief, but in recognition, as if I'd been waiting for this, not the gesture, but the affirmation. I slid my fingers into his, and everything else in the room went still. He turned toward the crowd, his voice finally cutting through the silence. "I don't sit with people who disrespect my wife," he said. He wasn't loud. He wasn't angry, but the weight of that sentence crashed into every corner of the ballroom like thunder and velvet. Beatrice shifted in her seat, her lips parting. "Nathan, we didn't expect you," she began. He looked at her, not cruel, just unmoved. "I'm not here for you," he replied. "I'm here because she no longer needs to stand alone." For the first time, it wasn't me who looked small in that room. It wasn't me fumbling for a place card or a nod or a title. It was them scrambling behind their smiles, their charity speeches, their curated narratives. And suddenly, the woman they'd called a charity case in heels became the one everyone stood to face. The ballroom was still frozen from Nathan's arrival. No one moved. No glasses clinked. No laughter bubbled up to smooth the moment. He hadn't said more than a dozen words, but they had landed with more weight than every embellished toast that had come before. I didn't rush to the stage. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, unshaken. The soft sound of my heels echoed against the marble floor, matching the hush that had fallen over the crowd. My heart wasn't pounding. That surprised me. What I felt wasn't fear. It was something firmer, like steel where there had once been paper. I reached the stage just as Evelyn began to shift toward the podium, lips already parted. Evelyn looked stunned. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I didn't touch the microphone. Instead, I stepped forward and let the silence hold. Sometimes you don't need volume to command a room. I looked around at the donors, the family, friends, the neighbors who'd watched me grow up in hand-me-downs while Evelyn posed for yearbook photos. I caught the eyes of the photographer who had waved me away an hour earlier, of the senator's wife, of the same foundation board who'd voted me out of my own project 3 years ago, without ever asking why. I was told, I began slowly, voice level, that grace meant shrinking, that to protect peace you must sacrifice truth, that being kind meant not embarrassing people even if they were the ones wounding you. No one interrupted. But grace isn't silence. It isn't absence. It certainly isn't invisibility. My gaze shifted to where Beatrice sat, her fingers tight around her wine glass, her knuckles pale. My entire life, I've been asked to step aside, let others shine, let others speak, let others take the credit, because you're the stronger one, Clara. You're the mature one, you understand. Well, I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, I do understand. I understand that some people only love you in quiet because it keeps their story loud. I understand that invisibility is sometimes demanded, not deserved. I didn't name Evelyn. I didn't name Beatrice. I didn't have to. Truth has a funny way of revealing itself even when no names are spoken. And from this day forward, I said, lifting my chin, I will not mistake being tolerated for being loved. I will not confuse being overlooked with being humble, and I will never again disappear to make someone else comfortable. The room wasn't silent anymore. Some nodded, others sat frozen. I stepped away from the mic, still untouched. As I descended the steps, Harper appeared at the side of the stage. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She simply plugged in the USB I had given her days before. The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. The first image, me reading my vows into the camera in my own voice. No edits, no cuts, no filters. Then my non-profit presentations, funding proposals with my name replaced by Evelyn's in email threads, clips of her on morning talk shows, reciting phrases I had written, her laughing on phone calls, laughing at me. Then the voice memo. You should have seen her face when I called her charity case. Pathetic. There were no dramatic gasps this time, just stillness. My image returned, overlaid with my actual IRS filings, documentation, timeline, and last, a single photo. The silk handkerchief embroidered with Clara, faded, real. The screen went black. Someone stood up from their chair, an older man who'd been a donor for nearly 15 years. He removed his name tag. I'd like my pledge withdrawn, he said clearly. Another voice followed. Same. Evelyn stood stiff near the front table, her makeup cracking at the corners of her smile. Beatrice was no longer at her seat. A glance behind revealed she had slipped quietly from the ballroom. I didn't speak again. I stepped down from the stage, crossed the room without a backward glance, and walked toward the far table where my clutch sat. Inside was the handkerchief, still folded, still mine. I took it out, smoothed the edges, and folded it once more, clean, precise. This wasn't about vengeance, not anymore. It was about presence. They hadn't needed to say my name, but they'd all heard it now, whether they admitted it or not. And in that moment, I wasn't small. I wasn't secondary. I was the one they couldn't ignore, even if they never said my name. The chairs were still warm from bodies that had occupied them just hours ago, but now they sat empty, scattered across the veranda like tired soldiers after a long campaign. The breeze was gentler now. Even the sky, streaked with soft purples and washed-out golds, seemed to have exhaled. I sat quietly, coffee in hand, watching the last staffers wheel carts of leftover champagne and floral centerpieces toward the back gates. Today, the silence belonged to me. Beside my cup was the handkerchief, pressed, folded, and placed with intention. I didn't clutch it anymore like a lifeline. Apparently, it simply rested there, like a seal on a letter finally signed with my own name. Nathan joined me without a word. He didn't sit in his usual stiff military posture. He just leaned back, elbows on his knees, staring out at the garden like he too had just emerged from something we hadn't prepared for but somehow survived. He glanced over once, then spoke softly. The foundation lost 2/3 their donors by noon, the board's issuing a review. I nodded. And Evelyn? I asked, though I already knew. He hesitated. She's trying to spin it, but it's not landing. A pause. Beatrice, he shook his head. She hasn't called. I let the air hang heavy between us for a moment before saying, I didn't want her to fall. I just couldn't keep shrinking to let her rise. Nathan didn't answer. He didn't have to. The victory didn't taste like revenge. It tasted like breathing again fully, without fear I'd bump into someone else's version of me. The soft click of heels drew our attention. Harper stood at the far edge of the stone path, holding a small box. She looked unsure, more so than I'd ever seen her. I just came to return these, she said, offering the original hard drive with all the footage, unedited, untouched. I rose to meet her halfway. I didn't change anything else, she whispered. Not after everything, I nodded. She lingered a second longer before adding, Whatever you do with this, thank you for reminding me that women don't have to apologize for taking up space. A soft smile crept up on my lips. We never did. We just needed someone to say it out loud. Her eyes misted a little, but she blinked it back and left with no more words. The sound of her footsteps fading was replaced by birds settling in the hedges nearby. Later, when the house was finally still, I returned to my room. No notes, no rehearsals, no audience. I sat on the window bench, opened my phone, and tapped on a file I'd listened to only once before. My voice filled the quiet, soft, steady, clear. I promise not to disappear just to make others comfortable again. I closed my eyes, letting that vow rest in the room without shame, without doubt, without apology. I reached into my drawer, pulled out the handkerchief and held it with both hands. The stitching was faded, the fabric soft from time, but the name was unmistakable. Clara. Mine. I opened the window, letting the cool air rush in. You tried to make me invisible, I whispered into the breeze, not needing to aim it at any one person, but I was never yours to erase. And with that, I stood. Some names don't need to be shouted, they just need to be honored by the person who carries them. And I carry mine now, not in shame, not in silence, but in full view. The handkerchief didn't make me whole, but it reminded me that my name, my truth, was stitched into this story long before they tried to cut it. Yet, as I held it, a quiet ache lingered. I'd reclaimed my voice, but the scars of betrayal stayed. Evelyn's silence since that night spoke louder than her taunts, and Beatrice's absence cut deeper than her dismissal. I stood taller, but not unburdened, knowing some wounds heal slowly and some truths, once spoken, leave you alone with their weight.